Something invisible is hardening your inner eye, and it has been doing it without you knowing. You wake up, and something in your world feels muffled. Colors are the same, but they do not sing. Your gut tells you there is more to see, and yet the signal comes back blurred. That hush is not always obvious. It arrives like a slow tightening, the way a knot forms in a rope that once held a sail. You notice not when it first began, but when the wind dies and the sail will no longer catch. To answer the question in the title, what is hardening your pineal gland without you knowing, we must follow two threads at once. One that walks through human history and hidden teachings, and one that looks at the everyday patterns that shape your attention. Neither is a complete map of truth. Both point to what can stiffen your capacity to perceive beyond the obvious. Before we go deeper, a short note. This interpretation draws from Gnostic sources and is one esoteric perspective, not a universal theological claim. Centuries ago, in collections like the Nag Hammadi codices and in texts such as the Gospel of Philip, communities preserved a way of speaking about memory, marks on the body, and a lost ability to remember origin. Those texts speak not in laboratory language but in images, the soul as a fragment, an origin that has been hidden, teachers who point to the possibility of remembering. Take that language as a key rather than a textbook. It opens a door into how tradition after tradition names the loss of subtle perception. Here is a simple translation. At the center of your head there is an organ, the pineal, that many spiritual traditions have long associated with inner sight or subtle sensing. When I speak of the pineal as an organ, from an esoteric perspective, not medical advice, I am not making medical claims. I am using it as a symbol and a possible focal point, a place where attention and biology meet in the story of perception. The question is not merely anatomical, it is existential. What makes this eye inside the skull grow calloused so that you no longer tune into quieter currents? Think of the human being as a multi-layered instrument. On one layer, you are a living body registering food, pain, light, and sound. On another layer, you carry inherited stories, cultural rhythms, family expectations, the voice of institutions that shape what counts as real. On a third layer, there is the memory of origin, that sense taught in ancient circles as something you might remember. The fact of being part of a larger source, a spark that knows more than the surface mind. Gnostic cosmology used images to map this descent. A monad, the primordial source, radiates fragments into forms. A figure called the demiurge builds a world with boundaries, and lesser powers, archontic forces, stand between the spark and its remembrance. Translating that into contemporary language. Every culture creates systems that orient attention. Schools, media, rituals of work and entertainment, algorithmic feeds. These are modern archontes. They do not have to be malicious to be effective. Most of the time, they are simply efficient at shaping what you look at and what you forget to look for. The hardening then works on two fronts. First, there is the conditioning of attention, repeated patterns of distraction, perpetual rush, the demand to respond instantly, the flattening of interior life into notifications and headlines. Second, there are the bodily habits and environmental patterns that flatten sensation, chronic stress that narrows your breathing, constant blue light exposure that alters sleep and dream cycles, a life dislocated from nature's rhythms. Some of these are social problems, some are lifestyle choices, and some are systemic. All of them are possible mechanisms that, in practice, desensitize the organ symbol we call the pineal and the inner faculty that listens. Before you go any further, try this. Place your fingers gently at the base of your skull, where your neck meets the head. Don't press hard. Just feel the hollows, the muscles, the subtle temperature of the scalp there. Now rest the outside edge of your hand against the side of your palm, the area along the little finger, and finally rest your open hand over your sternum at the center of the chest. Breathe naturally. Stay with slight curiosity. Do you notice any difference in tone, warmth, tingling, the way your breath settles? This is not a test of belief. It is a simple check-in with the body that will orient everything we do. If this is speaking to you, subscribe now to follow this activation series and learn deeper steps in the coming videos. What you just did is not an esoteric trick. It is a signal practice. Traditions that speak of marks on the body, the base of the skull, the lateral line of the hand, the center of the chest, were describing what we might call anchor points for attention. The base of the skull connects to what grounds you, to the place where your lineage and early conditioning form a pattern. The lateral hand, the active edge you use to point, to touch, to orient, can be read as a place of perception in action. The center of the chest is where you stand to speak and to command your life into being. In Gnostic phrasing, these were signs of origin, of perception, and of voice. In practical terms, they are places where you can test the living body's responsiveness. Now let us map the actors that cause hardening. First, chronic distraction. Distraction is not merely an annoyance, it is an architect. Every time you trade sustained attention for fragmented attention, you lay down a neural path that favors reactivity. The inner eye learns to expect interruption. The result? The subtle signals that once rose, images in the ether of your attention, the soft whisper of intuition, are drowned in noise. Online platforms are optimized for that noise. Notifications reward immediacy. Algorithms harvest repetition. Over months and years, your pattern of attention becomes flatter and more brittle. This is a structural hardening. Second, stress compression. When you live in a state of chronic sympathetic arousal, the fight or flight rhythm, your breathing shortens, your heart rate climbs, your sense of safety contracts inward. Sustained stress teaches the body to prioritize survival signals over contemplative ones. Internally, that can look like a tightening at the base of the skull, a clenching behind the eyes, a reduced capacity to rest in the stillness required for inner sight. Stress narrows the lens. Third, sensory overload. Too much stimulation, light, sound, constant input, reduces differentiation. If everything is bright and loud, nothing becomes luminous. Quiet is not absence. It is a medium in which fine perceptions arise. If your life has been filled with noise and excess visual stimulation for years, your capacity to notice subtle shifts can atrophy. Fourth, cultural conditioning and storylines. You live inside narratives. The story of productivity as virtue, the story of the external as the only source of meaning, the story that equates sensation with truth. These narratives tend to delegitimize inner knowing as subjective or wishful thinking. Over time, internalized skepticism, the kind that says, "that was just nerves," or "you're being fanciful," becomes a habitual check that shuts down the nervous system when contemplative signals arise. Fifth, environmental and lifestyle factors, diet, disrupted sleep patterns, exposure to toxins, lack of sunlight, are often proposed in spiritual circles as contributors to decreased vivacity of subtle perception. Mentioning them here is to acknowledge an ecological layer. What you ingest, how you sleep, whether you move, all of these shape your general sensitivity. When we speak about such factors, we speak prudently. These are perspectives, not medical diagnoses, and this is not medical advice. If you have health concerns, consult a professional. Sixth, institutional design. Modern institutions, schools, corporate environments, bureaucratic systems, reward compliance and the suppression of unorthodox perception. They reward measurable outputs and penalize contemplative time. This creates a cultural feedback loop that trains minds away from receptivity. These actors don't act alone. They collaborate. Stress increases the appeal of distraction. Distraction feeds cultural narratives. Institutional rhythms shape sleep. Over time, this collaboration forms the hardening we speak of, a condition in which the inner faculty that recognizes nuance, pattern, and connection becomes sealed under layers of learned reactivity. But this is not fatalism. Hardening implies a process, and therefore a process can be reversed or softened. The language of ancient teachers pointed to practices that reintroduce a different architecture of attention. Here are practical, safe ways to begin the softening, framed as attention practices rather than medical treatments. First, micro-silences. Start with intervals of 5 minutes daily where you intentionally withdraw from screens and external input. Sit somewhere still and set a gentle timer. Allow your breathing to lengthen. Do not aim to see anything. Your only task is to let the inner noise cassette slowly pause. Repeated micro-silences train your nervous system to release tension and increase sensitivity to subtle signals. Second, breath that opens. Find a posture where the spine is supported and the chest is free. Inhale slowly for a count that feels natural, then let the exhale be slightly longer. This simple bias toward longer exhale engages the parasympathetic nervous system and creates space for deeper sensing. Do this for 3 to 5 minutes. The goal is not to fix the mind, but to create a receptive field. Third, grounding practices. Walk barefoot on earth if you can, or place your palms on a tree trunk, or simply rest your back against a solid wall and feel the support. Grounding helps recalibrate the overactive fight-or-flight pattern and restores a sense of embodied safety, making room for delicate perception. Fourth, screen hygiene. Limit evening screen exposure. The light and the rhythm of scrolling train your brain to expect constant novelty. Create a boundary. A couple of hours before sleep, move into low-stimulus activities. Reading printed books, quiet conversation, intentional journaling. Sleep is not merely downtime, it is a laboratory for the patterning of attention. Fifth, attention training through small rituals. Rituals anchor the mind. It can be as simple as a daily 3-breath check-in with the touch points: base of skull, lateral hand edge, center of chest. Press gently, breathe, and note. Over weeks, this simple habit becomes an internal map, a way to read the system. The marks become less symbol and more lived tool. Sixth, community mirrors. Perception is developed in relation. Share experiences with a trusted group or a guide who respects your interior life. A community that values inner sight helps you calibrate, to know when a signal is likely noise and when it could be meaningful. Now, for the part many are waiting for, the guided self-check that helps you sense whether your inner eye is stiffening, and a brief activation you can use immediately. This is a subjective exercise. It requires no belief, only attention. Find a comfortable seat. Allow your feet to rest on the ground. Close your eyes if that feels safe. Otherwise, keep a soft gaze. Place the fingers of both hands gently at the base of your skull. That ridge where head meets neck. No pressure, just contact. Notice any sensation: warmth, coolness, tension, ease. Stay curious, not judgmental. Now slide your right hand so its outer edge, the side along the little finger, rests lightly along the outside of your left palm. This is the lateral hand touch, a place associated with perception in action. Notice any difference between this hand and the touch at the skull. Are there micro-movements, subtle vibrations, the sense that one point feels more alive than the other? Finally, open your hand and place it over the center of your chest, the place where breath meets voice. Feel the rise and fall. Sense whether there is a spaciousness or a tightness under this touch. Breathe slowly 3 times. On each exhale, let your attention travel like a small lantern from base of skull to lateral hand to chest. Observe what changes. If you felt dullness, numbness, or little contrast between these points, that could be an experiential sign of stiffness, a soft indicator that the channels of attention are less porous than you might wish. If you felt subtle warmth, a quiet hum, or small shifts, that could be a sign of responsiveness, an invitation that the inner eye still listens. these sensations are not objective measures. They are invitations to notice. They are the first page in a manual that is written in your own felt experience. Now, a short activation. This is not a cure. It is a practice of reclaiming attention. Repeat the following in your mind or aloud, at a volume that feels safe. Keep your hands in the three places: skull, lateral hand, chest, in whatever configuration is comfortable. Breathe. Then say, "I clear the channels of my inner sight now." That sentence has 9 words. It is concise so your nervous system can carry the rhythm. Say it once, slowly. Breathe. Say it again. Notice any shift in temperature, pressure, subtle movement, or inner imagery. Do not expect fireworks. Expect a small settling, a slight reorientation. Afterward, rest for a minute. Notice whether anything changed in your day-to-day clarity. Did you notice a thought that would have otherwise slid by? Did a detail in the room sing for a moment? These are the small proofs we carry forward, not dramatic revelations. What else hardens this eye that we must name candidly? There are narratives that insist vision is only validated by institutional authority. When you have absorbed that, your inner sight learns to self-doubt. When every novel, intuitive impression is dismissed by an internal committee trained in skepticism, the faculty learns to stay quiet. That internal committee is a necessary voice in public life. It can also become an internal censor when it dominates. The task is not to overthrow it, but to create a council where inner perception has a seat. Another agent is fear of belonging. Many people conform because group acceptance matters. To be smooth, to avoid challenge, to fit. These social pressures teach the nervous system to be small. The inner eye prefers spaciousness. Smallness calcifies perception. There is also the myth of immediate productivity. Your attention is a resource. If you allocate it exclusively to tasks that yield immediate, measurable output, you deprive it of the less quantifiable work of sensing. Sensing is slow. The modern religion of speed makes it a casualty. Addressing these cultural and internal forces requires both individual and collective work. Individually, cultivate the habits already mentioned. Micro-silences, breathwork, grounding, screen boundaries, ritual check-ins, community. Collectively, create spaces, at home, at work, in your friendships, where slow listening is honored. When a culture grants time for quiet and reflection, sensitivity is not merely permitted, it is cultivated. You may have heard stories in spiritual circles that point to decay or calcification of the pineal as a literal biological condition. Some people treat that language as a metaphor for emotional and attentional atrophy. Others see it as a literal process influenced by environmental inputs. What matters here is to hold both perspectives lightly. If you have concerns about neurological health, sleep disturbances, or physical symptoms, seek qualified medical advice. This work is not a substitute for clinical evaluation. Our focus here is on reclaiming a quality of attention and a capacity to notice, practices that support well-being but do not replace healthcare. There is also a theological care. Many Christians and others can rightly be wary of Gnostic cosmology. When I draw on images like archontes or the demiurge, I do so as metaphors that describe how systems can obscure origin. These images are part of a particular tradition. They are not offered as a replacement for canonical teaching, nor are they a universal claim about the nature of God. If your tradition values different language, translate these metaphors into the terms that resonate with you. Powers that cloud perception, structures that demand compliance, forces that prefer you to look outward rather than inward. If you are skeptical, good. Skepticism sharpened with honest practice is valuable. Use that skepticism to test experiences, not to dismiss them before you have sat with them. Now I want to give you a 5-day starter plan, small steps you can take that support softening without dramatic commitment. Day 1. Micro-silences. 10 minutes in the morning with no screen. Sit with your 3 touch points for 3 of those minutes. Repeat the 9-word sentence once. Day 2. Breath that opens. Do a 5-minute guided breath practice in the afternoon. Then check your touch points for a minute. Day 3. Grounding. Spend at least 10 minutes barefoot on grass or connected with a tree. Afterward, note differences in steadiness or sleep. Day 4. Screen boundary. Create a 2-hour window before bed free of screens. Replace it with low-stimulus activity and a short journal note on any inner movements. Day 5. Community mirror. Share one observation with someone you trust, not to prove anything, but to practice articulating subtle experience. Notice how speaking about it shapes the experience. After these 5 days, return to the check-in. Do the touchpoint sequence. Have you noticed any change? Even a small increase in contrast, one place a hair more warm, one breath that feels deeper, is a sign to continue. There are other practices that people often use in a sustained way. Fasting from media, creative practices that require prolonged attention, painting, long-form writing, wilderness time, and nights of extended sleep aligned with natural light. These can be powerful, but they require commitment and safety. Pace yourself. Do not use extreme practices to chase results. The goal is steady cultivation. Remember also to honor the ordinary engines of health: consistent sleep, movement, social connection, and nutrition. These do not magically fix inner sight, but they create a field in which sensitivity can recover. You may ask, how will I know if the hardening has actually softened? There will be no single dramatic test. Tuning is incremental. You will notice things like decisions that previously felt heavy become clearer. A pattern reveals itself in your life without effortful deduction. You find imaginative solutions in moments you would previously have considered impossible. A small piece of art or the face of a stranger stirs you in a new way. These are the soft proofs. If you stay with this practice for months, you will likely discover that old patterns reappear. That is normal. The world contains forces that prefer fast attention and measurable output. Part of the work is to build rituals and companions that keep your inner life a priority. Community helps. A person who practices alone is more vulnerable to doubt when results are not instantaneous. A final caution. These practices are about empowerment, not about producing mystical credentials. The goal is not to become better than anyone else at perceiving. The goal is to reclaim your capacity to discern, to be less easily manipulated by systems that flatten attention, and to live with more integrity between what you feel inside and how you act outside. We began with a question. What is hardening your pineal gland without you knowing? The answer is necessarily many-layered. It is the slow architecture of distraction that modern life builds, the compression of chronic stress, the overload of sensation, cultural storylines that delegitimize inner knowing, and environmental and institutional patterns that train attention to be immediate and shallow. Layer on top of that personal habits and traumas, and you get a dense crust. But this crust is not invincible. Attention practices, breath, grounding, ritual check-ins, community work, and small consistent changes to lifestyle create the conditions for softness to return. Before we close, a short reminder. When I speak of the pineal as a focal organ, from an esoteric perspective, not medical advice, I do so to give a concrete place where attention can gather. This is metaphor and practice, not a medical protocol. If you experience health issues, please consult a qualified healthcare professional. If this message reached you and you want to continue, leave a single word in the comments: recognition. Share one small sensation you felt during the activation: a warmth, a brief image, a change in breath. Your word becomes a mirror for someone else who is listening. And subscribe if you want to follow the rest of this activation series, where we will go deeper into pacing, longer practices, and community forms for sustained cultivation. Go lightly with yourself. The work of softening is patient work. It asks for fidelity more than intensity. Come back tomorrow and do the check-in again. Over time, the small acts of attention add up, and the inner eye begins to open with a steadier, truer light.